My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Friday, January 25th, 2008, and I'm in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, interviewing Dr. Isabel Keith Baker. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Dr. Baker was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 1997. A retired university professor and longtime educator, she served on the OSU-A&M Board of Regents from 1991 until 1999. Through the years, Dr. Baker has received many honors, including being named Oklahoma Mother of the Year in 1978. In addition, she was also inducted into Oklahoma State University's College of Education Hall of Fame in 2005. Thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Well, let's begin by learning a little more about you. Could you start with where you grew up and give us a little background on your early life?
I was the daughter of teachers, and my mother and dad taught together for 10 years, and then he went into the construction business later. And I grew up basically in the Tahlequah area. We lived in another rural community, but we would come to Tahlequah every summer so she could go to summer school. And then we moved here permanently when I was about 10. And it's been a wonderful place to grow up.
Well, if you can, run through some of the schools you attended as a young child.
As a young child, I went to school to my mother for a couple of years in a rural school in Cherokee County, and then basically Tahlequah Public Schools. And I attended Northeastern State University has a laboratory school, and I thought that I had the best of both worlds because I was being taught by college professors and interns, and I graduated when I was 16 from high school because every time we'd turn around, they would come in and say, we need someone to take Algebra 1, or we need someone to take English 1 or 2 for our student teachers. Can you go August Extension, Isabel, or can you do this? And first thing you know, I had enough to go on to college. And so it was somewhat different and interesting going to a laboratory school.
Now, having parents that were also educators, you couldn't get away with a whole lot, could you?
No, and besides that, those were the days when, we were all so poor that back, in the Depression days, and there wasn't much you could get in. You didn't have the money to get into any kind of trouble, and we had a close-knit family, very religious family. We spent a lot of time in church and activities, like that. And they were wonderful parents. Great parenting skills.
Now, what were some of your favorite subjects?
I liked anything that had to do with English, literature, grammar. I liked history. I loved those classes, and those were my favorite classes. Anything that I loved to read and get lost in books. We didn't have the money to travel or do anything like that, so I traveled through books. And I love that.
Now, when you're younger, did you ever think that you would go on and become a teacher, or did you have other aspirations?
I'm almost ashamed to say what my real aspirations were, but I read some of those stories as a young teenager about lady detectives, and I thought, oh, if I could be a lady detective and solve all these crimes, and that would be such an exciting life. But that was a young girl's fantasy, and so it didn't take me long when I went into college to see that that my ambition and my talents would be in teaching. So I got into the teaching, profession. And my mother was quite liberal, but on this particular subject, she wasn't that liberal, because she said, well, I think it's fine for you to go on to college, but you need to get a home economics degree because you'll be a better wife and a better mother. And I said, well, but I don't know. She said, well, you already know how to cook, and you need to learn how to sew, and la-di-da. So to please her, I do have a home economics degree, and I did rather well in it, but I didn't like it. And so instead, I had 3 or 4 majors. I received a speech and drama degree and in education and home economics. And then I later became a reading specialist, but everywhere I went to teach, the superintendent and principals would look over my transcript, and they would say, you have a home economics degree. Would you teach a couple of home economics classes? And I actually wanted to get it taken off my transcript because I did not want to do that. And even though I love to cook, now, but I don't like teaching things like that. So, by the way, have you ever heard of Dr. Doug Dollar? He lives in Stillwater. He's a general. And he grew up out here in the hills of the Cookson Hills. And I remembered he came when I was inducted into the OSU Hall of Fame, College of Education Hall of Fame. He came to see me do that. He was one of my high school students. And I took this one-act play to state at Norman way back in the 60s. And he was the lead actor. And now he's a general. And I told him, I said, and he lives, as I said, in Stillwater. But I said, Doug Dollar, I never thought you had it in you to be a general. And when you were such a good actor.
Well, when you were younger, what types of activities did you do for fun?
I like to ride horses. We didn't have that much time we didn't have the money or the time to do fun. It was mostly, the fun was surrounded around our church. My mother played the piano at church, and we had singing conventions, and we would travel with singing conventions. And my family, we were all singers. And so my mother sang alto, I sang soprano, my dad sang bass, and then my sister sang alto, and my other brother sang high tenor. So we were kind of the traveling Keiths as a young, girl. And so we practiced a lot on those songs. And then you would win prizes and awards. And that was something that was fun to do. And a real treat would be to get to go to a movie and on a Saturday. And you could pay a nickel. And you could go in and out as many times as you wanted to. And so I would go early, about 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, and I would stay all day. I'd go out just long enough to maybe get me a hamburger, and then I'd go back because it was such a treat to see those Westerns. I loved, Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and all those Westerns.
Now going back to the traveling Keiths, did you travel around different Oklahoma cities?
Yes, it was strictly, it was like, sometimes we would go to Arkansas. In fact, my mother has a couple of songs that are in songbooks, and she did quite a bit of composing. She was a very good musician, and she was born in 1901 in Indian Territory, and my dad was born in 1900 Indian Territory, and her folks ran a hotel, and so she was the entertainer there on the organ for the people who came to the hotel in Indian Territory. Isn't that interesting?
That is.
And so that was, I guess, our recreation. And then, I can remember as a little girl, they would say, now if the Miss Keith will come and play for us, and then it would be our turn, to do our special song. And then I don't know how that worked, but you would get ribbons and certificates and different, I guess you would have judges, but I was pretty young when we were doing that, and I'm not sure how the judging took place, but I know we had a lot of awards and certificates. And my daddy was a great bass singer, and it was, religious music, and lots of religious music.
Well, tell me about some of your role models, people you looked up to during this time when you were younger.
My mother and I were very close, and we were very poor, and a lot of hardship. The state of Oklahoma during the Depression went broke, and I mean really broke. And so the teachers would get their paycheck, but you couldn't cash it because there was no money. And I can remember traveling with her around to different places to try to get people to buy her check, her warrant, for a profit, for interest, until the state gets the money. And I know she heard of one time, she was teaching in Cherokee County here, near Tahlequah, and she got word that there was a fellow over in Siloam Springs in Southwest City, Missouri, which is just over the line, that had a hardware store that would buy her contract or her warrant. And so we made that trip over there, and it was before Christmas. And I remember she said, now, I was about 6 years old, and she said, Isabel, let's don't show any emotion. When we go in there, if he says no, well, let's just be, sweet and nice and say thank you and leave. We're not going to cry or anything. We'll wait till we get to the car to do that. And she says, I said, okay. And so I remember him, he had his sleeves puffed up and those things, that you tie around your sleeves. And he had this cap on, this visor cap. And she told him what she wanted, and he said, yes, I think I can do that. And so she got the money, and we got outside, and she said, thank you. We got outside, and she said, hallelujah, we can have Christmas. Praise the Lord. And she bought us all little gifts, and went to the grocery store and got us all, good things to eat. See, I was born in 29. And this would have been about 35 when things were just really hard. And the nice thing about that, though, was everybody else was poor too. And it wasn't just us. It wasn't like that everybody was rich and we were poor. Everybody was poor. And we were having, we had to turn our crops over, and because there were too many crops, and they thought that was the problem with the Depression. And we had to get rid of our hogs because they thought there were too many hogs. And I know I remember seeing my mother stand out, with her apron crying, because she said those hogs could have been given to poor people instead of killing them. And so I guess my mother would be the one that I admire most for her character, her tenacity, her will or positiveness. I could not believe how positive she would be singing in the kitchen. I remember one morning she got up and she told my older brother, we don't have any food at all. And she said, it's drizzling rain. If you feel like it, why don't you go out and try to kill some squirrels? And she said, because the squirrels come out when it's drizzling. And we waited, and she said, oh, I heard that shot. I hope he got one. And here he comes back in about an hour, and he has 3 squirrels. One was an older one, and 2 were for frying. She made the best squirrel dumplings, and the best fried squirrel. And we just ate like kings. And while she was fixing that, she was singing in the kitchen. But there were a lot of great women that I admired in history. Helen Keller. Just so many wonderful women in this world that have had hard battles to fight. But I think she would be my heroine, I guess you'd say.
Now, you guys lived on a farm when you were growing up?
Yes, most of the time. And my dad was gone because he had, a lot of the time, because he had to work away to try to make a living, to send money back, because he couldn't make it on the farm, especially after they had to turn the crops over. I mean, after he had to turn the corn and the potatoes and everything over, and then he knew there was nothing, he had to do something. And he had stopped teaching to work in the construction business. And so he thought he could make more money away, so it was just us. And it made it, pretty hard for our family. I milked 2 cows every day. In fact, when my husband got back from the war, I didn't even know him before then, but his dad said, "You need to pass by that Keith place. I'm telling you, that little girl that lives down there is the milkingest girl I have ever seen. She's out there with a lantern every morning and every night milking those cows, and then she walks to school." And so anyway, that was my claim to fame. I was a good cow milker. Oh, goodness.
What were some of your other chores on the farm?
Well, killing the chickens to fry. I could wring a chicken's head. That sounds gross now, but I learned early, how to wring a chicken's neck. I wouldn't even think of doing that now, or even, it's just repulsive to me to think that anybody else would. But Mother would say, the preacher and his family's coming for dinner. We need to have at least 3 chickens. And if you don't mind, get out there and get them. So I would get out there and get them, and we'd get them ready. And those were different times, but they were fun times. Mm-hmm. In many ways. You become a closer knit family during hard times. And I think probably because of that is one reason maybe I've overly indulged my own children through the years. Probably more indulgent of material things, than maybe would be necessary. Of course, they say, Mother and Dad, I can't believe we never felt deprived. Never, ever did we feel deprived. We didn't have everything we wanted. We had everything more than what we needed. And how did you do that on teachers' salaries? And it's just, it's different.
Well, we spoke a little bit about your mother. Tell me about the rest of your family.
Well, I had a sister who's 5 years older. She's passed away. I had a brother who was 3 years older. They were both teachers. He was superintendent of schools in the Kenai Borough in Alaska. And my husband and I, before he passed away in May of 2005, we made a trip to Alaska. My brother had already died, but we went to visit the Kenai Borough and the school where he was superintendent of schools for several years. It was a lovely, lovely experience. And then my sister was a county home demonstration agent. But at that time, they wouldn't let you marry and be a county agent. And so she was in Haskell County in Stigler. And they said, absolutely, they called her from, she called OSU and she said, I've married and I just didn't want to cheat in any way. And they said, well, you can't have your position and be married. Of course, the men could be married and be county agents, but the women couldn't. So she had to give up her job. I told her I said, don't let them know about it. They're not going to come down here and check. She said, oh no, that would be cheating. I wouldn't want to do that. So she let them know that, and so she gave up her job and took a elementary principal's position. And then about 3 years later, they changed that rule and called her and told her they wanted her to come back. But she said, oh no, I'm happy with my principalship and my teaching, and I won't go back. But women have been discriminated through the years. I think I've been discriminated against less than probably anyone, but the only time I really felt discriminated against was there was a rule at all the state colleges that if you could go to college if you were pregnant, but you could not do your interning. You couldn't work with students if you were pregnant. I never knew what the philosophy was of that. Why would that be? Maybe they thought that, if the kids saw you looking like that they'd all want to run out and get pregnant, look the same way, or, sick, or, I don't know what their thinking was. But I did a little differently than my sister. I hid my pregnancy, and I was to graduate in May, and my son was to be born in August, and I was doing my interning. And my supervisor kept coming in and saying, Miss Isabel, it's very unprofessional to be wearing your jacket. And aren't you hot? Here in May, this is hot. I'd say, thank you, doctor, thank you for telling me. And then she'd come back again, and I would, just I just was not going to let them win and knock me out of graduating over my pregnancy. And so sure enough, I got through. And was it ever fun after May the 25th to be able to let it all hang out, basically, after your babies, so you don't have to hide your pregnancy anymore. Then they changed that rule later, too. But that was, I wondered, why didn't they go after the men impregnators? They didn't punish them for getting anybody pregnant. That's the only time I felt. But I didn't really, what makes me mad about it though, is that I wasn't mad. I wasn't incensed over it. I didn't like it, but now if that would happen, I'd march and I would get all kinds of people to carry signs and we'd protest. And a lot of times, I don't understand why I didn't stand up more. I know when the superintendent one time came into our classroom, or our faculty meeting, and he said, all the breadwinners are going to get a raise. My husband looked at me, and I said, huh. And he said, my money is your money, honey. And I said, and your point? I said, that's not the point. And, but he got a $500 raise, and I was proud for him. It wasn't that I didn't want them to get it, but I couldn't believe that we had the same amount of education, doing the same job, and he's getting $500 more. But I didn't march, and I'm mad that I didn't. Oh, goodness.
So how did you meet your husband?
Well, my husband lived down the road on a farm close to ours, and we both had small acreages. His mother was a teacher, so we had quite a lot in common. But I didn't know him because he's 4 years older than I am. And he went to war, and he came back and started college as a freshman. And because he'd been gone to war for 4 years. And we had an English class together. And actually we were enrolling. And he said, what classes are you taking? And I said, well, I don't know. And we just didn't have much to say. And then one Saturday, I was riding my horse, down by his place, and he pulls up in his car and honks his horn. And it was like in April, and or I forgot what. It was cold, I know. It was chilly, and the horse hadn't been ridden that much. And he said, and the horse kind of bucked, and he said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't know that you couldn't ride." And of course, I took off and didn't say anything. And I was so furious. And I went home, told my mother. I said, "Well, you can tell the Baker boys are back in town. He's already tried to kill me on my horse," and so forth. And then he called, and I told my mother, I said, "I don't want to talk to him. If he's the last person on earth, I wouldn't go out with him. I don't want his apology." So that's history. The rest is history. So then he took classes that I took, and every class that I took, he took. And so we were in the same classes. Finally, he said, "Just one date. Just one time." He said, I think you think I'm a bad person, and I'm not. Just one time. And I said, "Okay, one time." And as I say, the rest is history.
Well, that's very nice. Now, how many children do you have?
3 children, 3 sons, and 2 are attorneys, and 1 is an entrepreneur, and he's on the tribal council, and just was reelected to the Cherokee Tribal Council for another 6 years. And that's a big entity, the Cherokee Nation. They have many millions of dollars budgets, do a lot of housing and education and health for the people. Very, very good group.
And grandchildren?
I have 15 grandchildren and about 15. I have some biological and some not, but I count them all. I have 15 grandchildren and 15 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
And when we have a big family gathering, that's the reason I have this extra lot over here. We can have all this outside activity and cookouts and things, have lots of room for all of them.
So family's pretty important in your life?
Very important. Very, very. We're very, very clannish family.
Now, did you always had your sights on attending NSU, or were you looking at other colleges?
No other college at that time would have been an option because I wouldn't have had the money to have gone. I didn't have the money. There were no loans back then. And I knew my parents. It would be all that we could do. And I was working at a restaurant. I was working at the movie theater, taking up tickets. I was doing everything that I could to try to make enough money for enrollment. And then I didn't have the money to do the books. So I just didn't have the money. It was a little easier back then though, because a lot of times those same books, if you got there early, were in the library. And which now, that's, you can forget that now, because everything's better, it's on computer and all that. It's easier now to do without the books, but back then, the book was everything. And I had too much pride, I guess false pride, to tell the professor that I didn't have the books. And sometimes, they would say, "Isabel, you could have done better than this, you only made a B or something." And I said, "Well, I'll do better next time." And I didn't tell them, "Well, I don't have a book." And I didn't want to tell them. I didn't want the pity or anyone to say, "Well, you don't have the books." I just didn't want attention drawn to me. And then when I married my husband, he got his books free. So I started taking his classes. And I have introduction to industrial arts on my transcript, because back then you could do more electives. You could do a lot more electives. Now you can hardly do electives. You're just, it's everything you can do to do your required. But back then, you could do like about 20 hours of electives. And so I didn't want to miss out on hours. And I think it took 126 back then to graduate, I believe. And so I took all of those in that agriculture class and stuff that he took. And several of my friends and superintendents have looked on my transcript and said, we've never seen such a diversified transcript. You have agriculture, you have introduction to shop, woodworking, you have, all this stuff. And I wouldn't tell them that the reason I did that.
Were there a lot of women, say, in your industrial arts class, or
No.
were you the only one?
I was probably, in most of them, the only one.
Did the instructor do a double take, or?
A little bit. And, but the worst class that he got me into, because I didn't have booked, it was chemistry, a 5-hour chemistry class. Oh, that was so hard. And I was pregnant, and, we did all these, all kinds of experiments, and the smell just took my breath away. But anyway, we made it through. And, you survive. And
Now, what was campus like back in the late 40s, early 50s compared to now?
Well, you had this influx of veterans who had come back, and it was more serious. Now, my husband was a fraternity member of Phi Lambda Chi, and but I was so busy with my school and cooking and cleaning and having babies that I hardly had a chance to even look or notice. And after I graduated from Northeastern, then I went to Oklahoma State University and got my master's. And I got that when I was, I believe, 22. And I already had 3 kids by the time I was 22. And so I tease my friends and husband and say that's the reason I haven't been worth anything since. I burned out before I was 22. But I just, the campus didn't mean that much to me. What it meant was my ticket out of poverty. And the quicker I could get out of it and get a job and make things better for my kids and my husband, I wanted to do it. And I knew that it was going to take both of us to do that, because times were still pretty hard, even after the war. And salaries were low and things were high. And so.
Now, did you go straight to OSU, or did you enter the workforce?
I entered the workforce and started taking night classes. We would travel to Stillwater, and also they were offering some classes in Okmulgee out of Stillwater. The professors would drive down to Okmulgee, so that made it less distance. So I started taking that way, and then we could just go in the summer and a couple of summers and finish up. Hmm. And that's the way I did it. And it was lots, it was very interesting. I loved my work at Stillwater. And it was, just lots of fun seeing, different professors. Because most of the professors at Northeastern, I'd had all through high school. And so I knew them. And, I'd gone to the laboratory school, and they knew me and I knew them.
Why go on and get a master's? What was your goal?
The money.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that if I got my master's that I would get so much extra every month. And I was determined that my kids weren't going to have to be as poor, and my husband was determined, as we were. And that we were going to provide a good home for them, and that we knew that was the ticket, was to get your master's. And then too, I love to learn. I've always loved to learn. In fact, if I had my way, it wouldn't bother me at all to sit in right now and go to college with a new major. And that's the reason I take these trips to Europe. I take a lot of these educational trips. My husband and I have been to Paris and Germany, and Phi Delta Kappa offers educational trips, and I've enjoyed, some of them, and trips to cruises, trips to Alaska. I love to learn. I love to learn new things, and so it was exciting to me to get different professors at Stillwater, and I fell in love with the place.
Now, after you received your master's in 1954, where did life take you?
We were busy teaching. My husband and I taught together. He was a wrestling coach and a vocational teacher, and later became a principal and later a superintendent of schools. So, that was kind of the path that we followed. I was busy raising my kids, teaching, doing 3 or 4 plays a year, contest work, debates, active in the church, active in Little League with my kids, active in Cub Scouts, and my boys, 2 of my boys are Eagle Scouts. My husband was an Eagle Scout, so he was busy with, coaching and helping them with scouting, and just mostly raising the family, and in my teaching.
Now, where were some of the places you taught at?
We taught in Shider, Oklahoma, and I believe we were there for 5 years. And then we went to Sapulpa, and I believe we were there 2 or 3 years. And then we got the opportunity, and we needed to come back to Tahlequah because my husband's dad was getting older, and we needed to come back. And we got the opportunity to come back to Tahlequah. And then we stayed here until we went away to work on the degrees and went to Morehead State University.
Now, at Morehead State, what did you teach there?
Well, that was somewhat of an interesting story. See, my husband had gone to OSU and was getting what is that degree right after the master's? A specialist? He had gotten a specialist degree, and then he was going to go on and get his doctorate. But before he could finish, they wanted him to come to Morehead State University. So we went to Morehead State University for an interview. And during the interview process, they asked me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a teacher and I'm a reading specialist." And he said, "Well, what degrees do you have?" And I said, "I have a master's." And he said, "Well, how many hours do you have above the master's?" And I said, "1. And he said, "Well, our reading instructor wants to go away and finish his doctorate. I think you would be ideal to run our reading clinic." And then they offered me, this very good salary, more than double my salary here in Oklahoma. So I said, good deal. So that was my entrance into higher education. And they were so wonderful there. We loved it. We were there 3 years, and then they gave us sabbaticals to come back to Oklahoma to finish the doctorates, and which is what we did. And we just had a wonderful time. Then we had to go back to Kentucky to pay them back. After they'd spent all that money on us, well, we had to promise we'd go back for 3 years, and we did. And then we came back to Oklahoma, and I taught at Oklahoma State University. I was project coordinator for the OSU Teacher Corps project, which the Shawnee project was wonderful. that teacher corps project did so much good. And I was just thrilled to death to work with Dr. Pete Troxel there in the College of Education at OSU. And then I got the opportunity to come back to Tahlequah. And so I came back here and finished out my career at NSU.
What was it like returning to your alma mater now as a professor?
That was different. Well, I was not a professor. I was assistant professor, and but a lot of them there, I had known pretty well, and they were fun people to be. They were my mentors, so I enjoyed them, and but it was different. We had a really nice dean there. I can't even think of his name. Robinson, I think. Dean Robinson, wonderful guy. But you know how tales will flourish about different administrators. I don't know if this is true or not, but the rumor was that if he got mad at you, that he would say, "Let's go over." He loved to go over across the street at the center and have pecan caramel ice cream. So if you got invited to go have some pecan caramel ice cream, you were in deep trouble. So I laughed and said I never got invited to go to get the caramel ice cream except when I resigned. And he called me and said, "How would I like to have some pecan caramel ice cream?" And I thought, oh no. But anyway, and he told me, he said, "Dr. Baker, is there any way that we could get you to change your mind about leaving us?" And it made me feel so good because I thought he was going to, bawl me out or something and say, "Why are you leaving?" And, la-di-da. But he was so sweet, and I really appreciated it.
Now, in between being an educator, you have this, you developed a great spark in the political arena.
Absolutely.
There was a quote I read in '82 about the ERA, and it said, "I will not rest until my 4 granddaughters have the same opportunity as my 5 grandsons." What was that time like?
I'm still disappointed in that. I haven't lost my passion, that things are getting better, but we don't have, my granddaughters don't have equal rights that my grandsons have. Not only in salaries, they're still way behind on the amount of money they make, and in so many other ways they are discriminated against. And I'm happy and I applaud those who are stepping up and making it better. But we have a long way to go. And I just don't understand how one could be that discriminated against because of their gender. And if that is the reason. And I don't want to be a whiner, but it has bothered me through the years. Not so much for myself, because higher education has a lot better track record of equity, actually. I mean, I never felt at OSU. In fact, they came from Washington to OSU and to NSU and said, and interviewed women and said, "What is your salary? How long have you been here? What is your education?" And they absolutely made them divvy up if we were getting less. So, I mean, a lot has been done, but I'm so biased, I'm not a good one to ask on some of these political issues because my biases come through.
Well, you made a very ambitious run for Congress in the '80s.
Very dumb.
How did that come about?
Well, I I went to a political meeting, and a gentleman stood up and said, "I'm running for Congress. I'm a blue dog Democrat," he said. And I thought, what is a blue dog Democrat? And some of us asked him, what's a blue dog Democrat? And what are your plans? What are your goals? And I didn't like any of his answers. I mean, he didn't seem knowledgeable, in the questions, health care, Social Security, things that, mean a lot to most of us. He didn't come up with any answers. And I thought, and you're running for Congress and you can't even answer these basic questions? So I came home and I thought about it a long time and I prayed about it. And I thought, I know that I could be a better congresswoman than he would be. And but I had cancer surgery in January, and this was, in the spring. And I still didn't have all my strength back. And I thought, I can't do this. But there was just something that was just pulling me to try to do that. I suppose you could say each person in his or her life has one time to really foul up. And I guess that was probably mine. However, it was fun to run. I loved visiting with all the people. And I was not ashamed of even though I didn't win, I certainly was not ashamed of the race that I ran and the votes that I got. I mean, I was just thrilled to death. I carried, Muskogee County, and I carried Nowata County, Craig County, lots of counties, big counties I carried. And but as my husband and I laughed, everywhere we did real well where they didn't know me too well, but where they knew me real well, I didn't do very well. But I didn't carry my home county, which I really hated that. One of my sons, it was close, but one of my sons said, "Mother, when you have sons who are lawyers, do you realize that every time we go to court, half of the people love us and half the people hate us?" And they don't, so they tried to make me feel good by saying, "It wasn't you, Mother, it was your rotten sons or something," and I knew that wasn't the case. But some people probably thought that I was too liberal. Others probably thought I was, maybe because I was a woman. I'd hate to think that wouldn't be the case. I don't know why, I don't know why. I wanted to ask, why don't you love me? But I didn't. And I had promised my husband I certainly wouldn't sell the family farm to run this race. And the other person had quite a bit of money and outspent me and had a lot of money, to do the television ads. And then, of course, he lost in the fall. So, to a real popular Republican, Tom Coburn. So I would have never, even though if I'd have made my nomination, I wouldn't have made it in November because Mr. Coburn, was a multimillionaire and a doctor, a medical doctor, and very well liked. So I wouldn't have had a chance. But it was an interesting experience.
Why do you think it's important for us to, especially women, to be knowledgeable about what's going on in government, locally, statewide, and on a national level?
Well, what is it they say? The hand that rocks the cradle, I mean, I just think that it's just so important for not only women, but for all of us to know what's going on. I think that, we can't put our heads in the sand and just let someone else do it or let someone else decide what's going to happen to our future. I just think that we have to step out and be heard. And one of my sons said, "Mother, how many causes do you have?" Every time I turn around, you have a cause. And I work with Habitat for Humanity and the Relay for Life, and I walk with them, and I do all these walks and carry these signs and walk in the parades and do different things. And I said, I don't know, but I'm almost getting too old. I'm going to have to cut back on my causes because as I get older, my health's not as good, and I don't quite have the energy.
Now, you were named to the OSU A&M Board of Regents and later served as chairwoman a couple of times.
Yes.
Tell me about this experience and what it meant to you.
Being a member of the OSU A&M Board of Regents meant the world to me. It was for the first time, I felt that I could use my education and background in education to volunteer for this service. Some women and men, when they retire, they spend time at the hospital and volunteer, and they carry Meals on Wheels. I felt that 9 years was just wonderful. 8 years was just wonderful for me to be able to volunteer my services in something that I knew something about. I don't think that it was an opportunity that I just couldn't have dreamed that I would have ever had. And it was very shocking to me when I was appointed. I had my master's from OSU and my doctorate from OSU. And I was a Governor Walters appointee. And when he called, and I don't even know who nominated me, I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know there was one up or anything about it. And called me and said, we have heard from several people that we think you would be wonderful. And we're trying to find more women, more active women and so forth. Would you accept? And I was just thrilled. And they have a gentleman, Doug Wilson, who's the executive director of OSU A&M Regents, who is a wonderful guide and teacher who gives wonderful introductions to being a regent, helps you so much that none of us could make it without him, because he shows you the rules, the guidelines, sends the information to you, gives you thumbs up on different issues, and made it easy. If it had not been for having a good executive director at the Regents, it would have been very hard. And the people on the board were all, the ones that I worked with were all dedicated, loved OSU, cared about kids, wanted to move this state forward, wanted to move OSU forward. So it was a wonderful experience. I just couldn't ask for a better experience. I loved working with the presidents of the universities, with the heads of the departments, with the athletic people. It was a great experience. I just couldn't have dreamed that I could have had such a wonderful experience.
Now, sometimes you have to make the tough decisions, and something hit me earlier in this interview. You mentioned that your husband coached wrestling, and I remember reading something during your time with the Regents where one of the schools, I'm not sure which one, had to close down their wrestling program, and I remember reading a quote from you saying, this is such a tragedy. Was that because you had that personal connection to wrestling, or?
Well, I think any time you have to shut down a program, it's not just that program, but it's the kids that have scholarships. It's the dreams that are lost by the students. It's the coaches, families that are displaced. I think you think long and hard before you shut down a program. You don't take shutting down programs lightly.
Was it Did you find it difficult to make those tough decisions?
It was, but of course, we're only a recommending body. Actually, the decisions are made by the administration, and we tried not to ever micromanage. We weren't. I mean, we gave our input, but ultimately the decisions were left to the administration on those issues. And but the administrators in the OSU&M college system very sensitive to what the regents think and kept us very well informed on any hot topic. I appreciated that because we weren't blindsided ever by, or very, not to say ever, but very rarely were we ever blindsided with a certain issue. And it worked out very well. The relationship that the regents had with the administration was great. And then at OSU, you have a really strong faculty group that they're very vocal, and I admire them a lot.
Now, as a regent, did you also help spur growth within the system?
We worked on growth, and we made decisions about issues like that, and we were apprised of all the, we were very interested in getting a lot of scholars and raising our standards, but we also wanted to make sure we kept our mission, the mission of the land-grant college, and that's much different than other universities, say the one to our south. And their mission is very different. And whereas way back in Abraham Lincoln's day, we're to spread to the masses, to educate the masses. And we never wanted to get so exclusive and raise our standards so high that we had to knock a lot of people out. I had a little bit of conflict with some of that. I mean, I really like excellence, and I liked raising the standards and the ACT scores, but also you can't always tell by an ACT score how well a student can do. So I was involved in helping with the alternative program where, okay, you can't go to OSU because you don't have a high enough ACT, but you can go somewhere else. And if you make your grades one semester, then you can transfer. And I loved that plan, whereas before they weren't doing that. And if they prove themselves, like for instance, if you can't go to OSU in the fall because you didn't have a high enough ACT, if you go to summer school somewhere and you make really good grades, even as much as just a B average, they'll accept you. And I think that was a smart thing to do. Some people just don't test out well. They just don't test out well. And for whatever reason, but yet they make great grades. And I know I have one grandson that didn't test out well on his ACT, but he's a senior in law school, graduating cum laude, and you can't always tell just from a test. That's all. To me, I think that should only be one indicator, and not the whole ball of wax like we've done it quite a bit in the past.
Are you a big believer still in the land grant mission, even to this day?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just think that, Oklahoma is a rural state. And I know the family farm is not the same. And I know that we've had to do lots of technological technology advances in different areas. But I still think that basic mission is important and alive as ever. And but I'm so proud of the other great programs that we have at OSU. Engineering, I'm so proud of that. Vet medicine, absolutely the best in the nation. Our engineering programs, as I said, the best in the nation. We just have so many wonderful programs there. And I'm real proud of our College of Education. When I was on the Regents, the first thing right off the bat, NCATE came and didn't pass the College of Education, the accrediting group. And I put in a lot of effort trying to find out why we didn't pass. Because it worried me a lot. Why did we not pass? Because I know it's a great school. I know the teachers are wonderful. What happened? And the number one reason was that we had 25 programs scattered all over campus. That there was no centrally located place for the dean and all the faculty and all the heads of the departments. We didn't have a spot. It drove the committee crazy, going all over campus to the different people under the different departments under the College of Education. So we set in immediately to buy Willard, to restore Willard. And that was one of the best things that we've ever done. Now we have most everything right there in Willard, and I'm so proud of that. I didn't stay in the dorm when I was in there because I just went to work on my master's. But I'm told that it was a girls' dorm, and it was called the WOW Girls, Women of Willard. And I live in WOW, Women of Willard. And but if you've been in there, you see those beautiful marble floors, and OSU did a great job of restoring that. I'm so proud of Willard and the job that the College of Education is doing now, and they've passed NCATE every time since they had their building, and they're just doing great.
Yeah, Willard's an amazing facility.
Oh, it is. I love it. I was down there not long ago to a meeting.
And you did play a very key role in that development.
Well, I did the best I could toward that. I'm proud of getting that done with the other good regents.
Now, we learn the background we need for our careers in different places. Sometimes it's in the classroom, and sometimes it's on the job. Describe for me some of the most important places where you learned the background for your career.
That is a hard question. I don't know. I loved being a mother, and I loved teaching children, and I think my mother being a teacher, I think I learned how you treat parents and how you treat teachers, your colleagues, and how you treat students through her. A neighbor would drop by and talk about her problems with her son or something that was in school or something. I don't know. That's kind of a difficult question. I had really good teachers that I wanted to emulate. I had some really great teachers at the laboratory school, and caring and smart and inspiring. And I can remember one teacher called me in and she said, "Miss Isabel, it's been 10 days since you've checked out a book in the library. And you know, that might not sound like much, but that meant the world to me. That she was monitoring and was interested in me, you know, in that way. And she said, and we have a couple of new books that I thought you would like. And so I was probably 13, you know, or something like that. And she said, so I said, okay. And then she said, now when you bring these back, well, you know, I've got these others. And so we just developed a bond. I think that she was providing some attention, special attention that I needed. And then too, we've had some good pastors, you know, that have been very good, and that's basically it.
Can you go into detail about a key moment in your career that you consider one of your biggest highlights?
Well, one of my biggest highlights was when I was lucky enough to pass pass all my tests and get my doctorate, because I never had aspirations for that. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would ever have a doctorate or ever pursue one. It was just one of those things that I just kind of fell into. You know, I needed to double my salary, so I went to Morehead State. And then without applying for it, I get this letter, if you'll go back and do your doctorate, we can, you know, pay you half-pay sabbatical. And my husband got the EPDA fellowship plus half-pay. So, I mean, we looked on that as being rich. And so I got caught. I had to go. I had to leave and go, and I didn't even want to. I just didn't have aspirations to do that. And but I knew that I could do it. But I just would rather, you know, think about my family and do things with them, and I was perfectly satisfied. And I remember one of my first professors there had a long beard, and he rubbed his beard like this, and he says, half of you people in here are not going to make it through this doctoral program. Well, I went home, and I was stretched across the bed crying, and my husband came home, and he said, well, what's the matter? And I said, oh, Dr. So-and-so doesn't want us to do well, and he says half of us aren't going to make it. My husband said, honey, it's a joke. He was trying to intimidate you. You're smart. You're a good student. Don't let, you know, him intimidate you. I said, well, I don't want to go to a class to someone who doesn't want me to do well. And he says, well, don't quit. You're not going to quit. And I didn't. And, you know, I did fine. But, I mean, it was just different. So I guess the doctorate was maybe the highlight of being able to get it finished and done, because it was a lot of work. And writing your dissertation and doing, you know, all the work that you have to do to finish it. The classwork, you know, was a piece of cake. Anybody can do that, but the dissertation was really difficult. And then coming up with the money to run it all on that big computer, you know, and all that to compile your data. So I guess probably that. But I've received more than my share of so many honors in this world. You know, just so many honors. I mean, I just kind of, I think, oh my, this is wonderful. I don't know how they come about, but nice honors.
Well, speaking of honors, when you were notified that you were going to be inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame, what was going through your head at that time?
what was going through my head was, even though I had a hard time as a child, I never washed clothes on a board. I never did all the hard things like some of the pioneer women, and that there are all kinds of wonderful pioneer women that deserve that more than I do. And however, I'm honored, but I never, I thought, what is it that would cause them to give that to me? And I was surprised. And
do you remember who presented you at the ceremony?
President Halligan. They had asked him to present it, and he did a very nice job. He was the president of OSU at that time, and he did a very nice job. There were lots of people. My family were all there. My husband was very proud of me, and it was a very nice event.
What does this type of honor mean to you?
I don't know. I'm flattered. I'm pleased. But as I say, I think they're, and I'm not just trying to be modest, but I really think that there are a lot of wonderful, wonderful women that would deserve it more than I did. But I'm still thankful and glad that I got it.
Well, how do you feel that now people look at you as that role model?
They're in deep trouble. They're in very deep trouble. I don't know. But some of my granddaughters say that I'm their role model, and that pleases me. And it pleases me when I'm down somewhere and a former student says, "Oh, Miss Baker, you were my best teacher I ever had." That's the thing that I, really enjoy, and things that I don't even remember. Or a former college student that said, "Oh, I never will forget, you saved my life when you helped me with this or that," and those type things are the real rewards. When I get a card or letter from a former student, or I see someone and they'll send me pictures of their family at Christmas and are saying to me that maybe I touched their life in some very small way. It pleases me.
Would you like to say anything about the people who have helped play an important role in your life? I know we spoke about your mother.
I think that my teachers and, my husband, because I was only 17 when we married. And I was already in college. I'd graduated from high school when I was 16. And, but back during, that time, you grew up faster. It was different. It was a different world. And, but my mother just threw a fit when we told her that, we were going to marry. And she said, she won't get an education. She's smart. She needs an education. He said, "Miss Keith, I promise you that I will help her get whatever she ever wants to be." And he kept his promise. He never ever was anything but encouraging. And we'd go to school, he'd go half a day, I'd go half a day. He'd keep the babies, I'd keep the babies. And then as soon as we'd get through, he would go off and work till midnight sometimes, doing carpentry work, trying to get us through to make a living, make it better for our boys. And I think that my mom and my husband, because he was just so supportive and helpful. I mean, he would rock the babies. He was good about, helping put the dishes away and help cook or whatever. He was just, he was an ideal supporter. And it made it easier when you had someone, that was right there to help you and support you. And I couldn't have done it, without him. And then, of course, my mom was always that atta-girl personality. I've got the smartest, sweetest daughter in the whole world, and la-di-da, and what can I do to help you, and that type of thing. So I suppose, and my good teachers, those are the ones that really, I think everybody needs good teachers. And I don't think that we as teachers realize what an impact we have.
If you could give any piece of advice to your fellow Oklahomans, what would you tell them?
Probably the advice that I would give is be so proud of our wonderful state, but do not look at it with rose-colored glasses. That we have a long way to go in several areas, that we need to make things better, leave the wood pile a little bit higher than what we found it, and stay informed, and be sure and go vote.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Now, turning towards women, what's your advice to women who plan to follow in your footsteps and take that education route, become educators, and maybe even a little bit of a political activism on the side?
I would say take it a little bit slower, a little bit easier. Don't burn yourself out too early. Because it makes it a little bit hard when you do so much so early and try to do too much. It affects you. But always keep your goals in mind, your short-term goals and your long-term goals.
Well, in retirement, you've been keeping pretty busy.
I have.
Tell me a little bit about what you're doing nowadays.
Well, I'm on the board of directors of my bank, and I'm on the loan committee, and I'm very busy with the banking business. And I'm on the vice chair of our hospital foundation. We're just building 2 new clinics in Fort Gibson, a dental clinic and an urgent care center. We just went yesterday to do the groundbreaking. Very cold out there. And I'm active in Seroptimist, which is a women's organization where we further women's scholarships and things like that. And I'm also active in the American Association of University Women, which is also tries to help girls and further their education, scholarships, and what have you. I'm active in my church. I'm on the Pastor Parish Relations Committee, which is a busy committee. I am active in my party, my political party, and I actively and financially support candidates that I think would be good for Oklahoma. And I usually go very closely, what do you believe about this? What do you believe about that? And before I pick a candidate, and then when I do, I stick with them all the way. Sometimes I win and sometimes I lose, but I'm in there for the long haul. And then I have, big family, We have lots of family events. And a highlight, I guess, lately of my life has been I was able to take all of my family on a trip to California. And there were 45 of us who went to Disneyland, and we stayed at the Anaheim Marriott, which is right next to Disneyland. So you could just walk, practically there. Plus you could go to all those trips, Huntington Beach and all those different places. The San Diego Zoo and everything from there. And it was so much fun to have all of my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren take that trip. My husband and I had planned to do that for them. And but as he passed away, and I thought, well, I'm still going to do this. So I paid for all their trip, and we flew out and flew back. We were out there 5 or 6 days, and it was a wonderful trip. And we bonded, rebonded. The cousins, became closer. The little kids played together, and we had everything from 2-year-olds clear on up, and we had 2-year-old twins that were quite active on the trip, but we just loved them all and enjoyed it. That was a wonderful kind of a highlight that's happened lately. I love to be around family.
Well, what does Oklahoma mean to you?
Well, if you're an Okie, before you can understand that, you almost have to be an Oklahoman. I loved Kentucky, but I just could not get used to not being able to see the open sky, the open spaces. I did not realize that I was so attuned to the open spaces, because Morehead State University is a college about the size of Northeastern University, but it's kind of like Tahlequah. It's kind of down low. But in here, you can look out and you can see the sunrise and the sunset. Well, there you had to look straight up. It's so mountainous and all the trees, and I love trees, but I couldn't get used to just there was something about that when we would come back on vacations back to Oklahoma, there was just something exhilarating about the open spaces. So that's one factor. But I think that we're the friendliest, kindest people in the whole world. I think I got an email or something said only in Oklahoma will someone at Walmart say, "Can I help you find that?" and them not be an employee. And so, I think that only in Oklahoma will you speak to everyone, even though you don't even know them. And so, we're friendly people. We're a young state. We're such a young state. 1907, and my mother was born in the territory. My dad was 1901. And Missouri is an old state. Arkansas, Kansas, all these older states, and the culture is much different there. And this is the Wild West, where the West was won. And another thing is we have so much cultural diversity. We have all of these Indian tribes, these Native American tribes, and the 5 civilized tribes, and the Cherokees right here in Tahlequah, and then we have the Creeks, Chickasaws, and Seminoles, and all the different tribes. And there's a special bond among those tribes. And we have so much culture here. My husband's great-great-grandmother came on the Trail of Tears. And her mother and father died of pneumonia on the trail. And she was 12 years old and was brought here to Cherokee County with another family. You know, and that history is really something. The people around here don't like Andrew Jackson. They hate Andrew Jackson, and because he ordered the move from the tribes to come back to Oklahoma here. And I love that. I love that, you know, in a classroom, you would have children from all different tribes, some of them English not their first language. And I love teaching them. And I worked on a lot of federal projects where we did some special work with students. And many of them didn't, you know, speak English very well, and did some immersion programs and so forth. But it's just a wonderful state. It's a young state, but I think we're moving forward. I think we've done very well to be as young as we are.
When history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
Oh my. I would like for them to say that she got up every morning and did the very best that she could do. That she tried to help her fellow man, and that she tried to think less of herself and more of others.
Well, is there anything you would like to add that we have not spoken about today?
I can't think of a thing. I think you've been a great interviewer. I just thank you for the interview, and I'll be anxious to see this project, and I'm excited about it, and thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.